The first time little Mile Heart asked me if I was her dad now, the world around me went completely silent. The lawnmower stopped humming in my hands. The warm afternoon sun hung over the quiet street like it had forgotten to move. And on the porch next door, her mother, Sienna Vale, stood frozen with a basket of folded laundry in her arms, her eyes full of something I had never seen from her before: hope. Before this story continues, if you believe kindness can give broken people a second chance, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Tales. Your support helps stories like this reach people who still believe one gentle act can change an entire life. My name is Callum Reed, and for 3 long years I had lived by myself in a small blue house at the end of Alder Lane, the sort of street where neighbors traded polite waves, but rarely guessed at the weight hiding behind each other's smiles. I was 39 years old, divorced, and I carried a quiet inside me that nobody passing by could ever see. My house was always spotless, my lawn always neatly cut, my bills always paid on time, yet within those walls there was no laughter, no small footsteps on the floorboards, no one asking what was for dinner. There was only me, the steady tick of the kitchen clock, and the faint outline of a family I had once hoped to build. Sienna arrived next door on a bright Tuesday morning, driving an old white car packed with 3 cardboard boxes and 1 chipped flower pot, a little girl beside her with a mess of curls, dressed in yellow rain boots despite the cloudless sky. Mayal looked about 5 or 6, small for her age, with wide, watchful eyes that seemed to catch every detail grown-ups tried to hide. Sienna offered a smile when I came over to introduce myself, but it was the careful kind of smile worn by someone whose life had taught her not to trust kindness too easily. For the first few weeks, I only caught glimpses of them. Sienna balancing a bag of groceries in one arm while carrying Mayal's backpack in the other, Mayal drawing suns in chalk along the sidewalk. Sienna on the porch after dark, gazing at nothing while her daughter slept inside. Now and then I'd hear a cabinet slam shut, not out of anger, but exhaustion. Sometimes there were unpaid bills tucked beneath her windshield wiper, and other times I watched her count loose change by the mailbox before walking slowly back into the house. I wanted to help, but pride speaks its own stubborn language, and I understood it well because I spoke it too. People like Sienna didn't want pity handed to them. People like me were afraid that offering help might be mistaken for admitting we needed someone ourselves. Then, one afternoon, a flat tire changed everything. Sienna was crouched beside her car in the driveway, struggling with trembling hands to loosen a stubborn lug nut, while Mayal sat on the curb clutching a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. The sun beat down hard, the street sat still, and Sienna's face had gone red with frustration. I walked over unhurried and asked if she could use a hand. She insisted she had it under control, though it was plain that she didn't. I nodded and stepped back until Mayal glanced up at me and said her mom needed to get to work soon or they'd be in trouble. That was all it took. I fixed the tire without making a production of it. Sienna stood nearby with her arms folded, a mix of embarrassment and gratitude on her face. When I was done, she thanked me quietly and promised she'd find a way to pay me back. I told her that neighbors don't charge each other for flat tires. She looked at me then, really looked, as though trying to figure out whether kindness could ever come without strings attached. After that day, Mayal began waving at me every single morning. Soon after, she started bringing me drawings. The first was a lopsided sketch of my house. Then came a picture of my dog, even though I didn't own one. Eventually, there was a drawing of 3 stick figures standing beneath an enormous sun. When I asked who they were, she pointed to herself, then her mother, then me. I laughed it off lightly, but that little drawing stayed with me long into the night. Sienna worked long hours at a bakery downtown. Some mornings she left before the sun came up and returned home with flour dusted on her sleeves, aching feet, and eyes weighed down with worry. I came to learn that Miles' father had walked out before she was even old enough to remember his face. He never sent money, rarely called, and existed only in the stories Sienna avoided telling. She never complained outright, but the strain showed through in small ways: the porch light that stayed broken, the empty fridge on a Thursday evening, the way she'd claim she'd already eaten whenever Mile offered to share half a sandwich. I began helping in ways that did not feel like charity. I fixed the porch light and said I had extra bulbs. I shoveled their walkway and said I was already outside. I cooked too much soup and brought some over because it would go to waste. At first, Sienna resisted every gesture, but Mile always accepted with both hands, smiling like I had brought treasure instead of leftovers. Slowly, their house stopped looking like a place people survived in and started feeling like a place people lived. Mile planted marigolds by the mailbox. Sienna painted the front door a soft green. Sometimes on Saturday mornings, I would hear music through the open windows and see them dancing in the kitchen. Those were the moments that hurt and healed me at the same time. But happiness has a way of frightening people who have lost too one day. Sienna stopped answering the door. I noticed first that the curtain stayed closed. Then I noticed Mail was not outside with her chalk. By evening, I saw Sienna sitting on the porch steps with her head in her hands. I walked over carefully, not wanting to intrude. She tried to wipe her tears before I reached her, but it was too late. The bakery had cut her hours. Rent was late. Her car needed repairs. And Mail had come home from school crying because other kids were making Father's Day cards, and she did not know who to make one for. Sienna broke then, not loudly, but quietly, the way strong people break when they have spent years holding the roof up alone. She said she was tired of being brave, tired of pretending every bill would work out, tired of telling her daughter that everything was fine when every night she lay awake calculating how many days they could last. I sat beside her on those porch steps, the warm daylight fading around us, and for the first time in years, I told someone my truth, too. I told her about the marriage that ended after years of trying for a child we never had. I told her about the nursery I had painted once, then locked away after everything fell apart. I told her how I had convinced myself I was better alone because hoping hurt too much. Sienna listened without interrupting. When I finished, she placed her hand over mine. It was not romance yet. It was something quieter, two broken people recognizing the same storm in each other. From that day forward, something shifted. I started walking Mail to school when Sienna had early shifts. I taught her how to ride a bike in the church parking lot, jogging beside her while she shouted that I should not let go. I did let go, of course, and she rode 6 glorious feet before crashing into a bush and laughing so hard she forgot to cry. On rainy afternoons, she did homework at my kitchen table while Sienna picked up extra bakery hours. I kept a box of crayons in the drawer, then snacks, then a pink plastic cup that became Miles' cup. Sienna and I grew close in the quiet spaces between responsibilities. We shared coffee on the porch. We talked after Mile fell asleep. Sometimes she smiled at me, and I felt something in my chest open like a window after a long winter. But neither of us said what was happening. Maybe we were scared naming it would ruin it. Then Mile got sick. It started as a fever on a bright weekday afternoon. By evening, she was shaking under a blanket, her small face pale and damp. Sienna panicked but tried to stay calm. Her car would not start. I drove them to the clinic without hesitation. Sienna held Mile in the backseat and whispered that she was okay, even though her own voice was trembling. At the clinic, while doctors checked Mile, Sienna finally fell apart in the hallway. She said she had no emergency contact nearby, no family she could depend on, no one who would come running without being asked. I looked through the glass at Mile lying on the exam bed, clutching her one-eared rabbit, and something inside me answered before my mouth did. I told Sienna she had someone now. Mile recovered after 2 frightening days. It was only a severe infection, treatable and caught in time, but those 2 days changed everything. I slept in waiting room chairs. I brought coffee. I signed nothing because I had no right to sign anything, and that truth cut deeper than I expected. I was there, but not officially. I loved them, but not out loud. I belonged, but only until someone asked who I was. The question came a week later. It was Father's Day afternoon, bright and warm, the kind of daytime that makes every window shine. Sienna had invited me over for lunch as a thank you. Maëlle wore a blue dress and had a paper card hidden behind her back. After we ate, she climbed onto the porch swing beside me and handed me the card. On the front was another crooked drawing of 3 people under the sun. Inside, in uneven letters, she had written, "Thank you for showing up." I could barely breathe. Then she looked up at me with those big serious eyes and asked, "Are you my dad now?" The words landed in the middle of the porch like thunder. I looked at Sienna, afraid I had crossed some invisible line, afraid Maëlle had asked something too heavy for a child to understand. But Sienna did not pull her daughter away. She did not correct her. She only stood there with tears in her eyes and said, "He could be if he wants." For a moment, all I heard was the wind moving through the trees. I had spent years believing fatherhood had passed me by. I had buried that dream so deep I thought it was gone. But there it was, sitting beside me in yellow sandals, holding a paper card, asking not for perfection, not for blood, not for promises I could not keep, but simply for someone who would stay. I knelt in front of Maëlle and took her small hands in mine. I told her that being a dad was not just a name. It meant showing up when days were hard. It meant making breakfast, fixing bike chains, listening to scary dreams, cheering at school plays, and staying even when life got messy. Then I told her that if she and her mom wanted me there, I would be honored to keep showing up for as long as they let me. Maëlle threw her arms around my neck so hard I almost fell backward. Sienna covered her mouth and cried. And right there, in the soft afternoon light, on a porch with peeling paint and marigolds by the steps, the family none of us expected began. It was not perfect after that. Real life never is. There were hard conversations, legal questions, money worries, and old fears that returned at night. Sienna worried I would regret choosing them. I worried I was not enough. Maëlle worried that people who loved her might still disappear. So we proved love slowly, day by day. I stayed through tantrums and bills, through burnt dinners and school projects, through nightmares and quiet mornings. Sienna learned to lean without feeling weak. I learned that being needed was not a burden. It was a gift. Months later, Sienna found steadier work managing the bakery's front counter. I turned my locked nursery into a little art room for Maëlle, with a small desk by the window and shelves full of paper, paints, and glitter glue that somehow ended up everywhere. The first time she ran into that room, she spun in circles and said it felt like sunshine lived there. And maybe it did. 1 year after that Father's Day, Sienna and I stood in the backyard under strings of white lights while neighbors gathered with paper plates and lemonade. It was not a grand wedding, just a small promise made in front of people who had watched us become a family before we ever called it one. Meal walked Sienna down the little garden path, holding her hand like she was giving her mother away and keeping her at the same time. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at Sienna, then at Meal, and I said I had once believed love was something life either gave you or took away. But they had taught me love could also be built. One fixed tire, one bowl of soup, one porch conversation, one small child brave enough to ask the question adults were too afraid to say. Near the end of the evening, Meal climbed onto my lap, sleepy from cake and dancing, and whispered that she was glad I wanted to be her dad. I kissed the top of her head and told her the truth. I had wanted it before I even knew how much. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes family can be chosen, and subscribe to Kindness Tales for more emotional stories about love, healing, and second chances. Special request. Comment, I believe in second chances if you believe showing up for someone can change their whole life. Years later, people would ask me when I became a father. They expected me to name a courtroom date, a wedding day, or the moment paperwork made things official. But I always smiled and thought of that bright afternoon on Alder Lane, when a little girl held out a handmade card and asked if I was her dad now. Because the truth is, I became her father the first time I chose not to walk past their pain. And I became a family man the day her mother looked at me with tears in her eyes and said I could be, if I wanted.